Good evening, everyone. We are here to join our fellowship training program seminar on behalf of the ICHRRF. So, as part of International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom, Professor Nanda Fellowship Training Program, we invite all of you to join this program seminar. This is our logo of the ICHRRF. And the topic for today's seminar is Right to Life for School Children in the United States and the Epidemic of School Shootings. So again, formally, on behalf of the Board of Directors and the executive team of ICHRRF, I invite our audience. Good evening to people who are in United States, and good morning to our fellow who is in India and would be the presenter today. Our distinguished faculty includes Professor P. Nanda, Professor Yashwant Pathak, Professor Nalini Rao, Professor Lavanya Vemsani, myself, Mr. Clemens, Mr. Hardam Tripathi, who has joined us today, Dr. Yashodhan Agolgaonkar, who is supposed to be the faculty for today, Professor Nidhi Shendurnikar, and Professor Sen Ni. And at this point in time, as part of Professor Nanda Fellowship Training Program, we have two fellows, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, who joined in January of 2022, and Anushree Ghisad, who joined in July of 2022, and is going to be the presenter for the seminar today. As I stated, the topic for today's seminar is very important. Right to life for school children in the US and the epidemic of school shootings. Today is November 11th, Friday, 9 p.m. in United States, and November 12th, Saturday, 7:30 a.m. in India. Our fellowship training program seminars have a standard format. Usually there is a 25 minutes presentation by the fellow, followed by 10 minutes comments by chief mentor, who is Professor Nanda, a 25 minutes discussion by the preceptor, and 30 minutes question and answer. Unfortunately, in today's seminar, Professor Nanda is not going to be there, and it is not very clear if the faculty preceptor for today's seminar is duly involved in the preparation or not. So I'm not sure whether he'll be able to join. I've sent him a message. Before we start the seminar, I have a few announcements. I'm very pleased to say that Professor Sen Ni has graciously accepted to be the Director of Outreach for the ICHRRF for the Northeast Asia region. Dr. Shekhar Patel has assumed the responsibility as Secretary Board of Directors of ICHRRF. In the month of October, we had two special programs. One was a seminar on human rights in Pakistan, basically ethnic cleansing of religious minorities in Pakistan, that was organized by ICHRRF, and a human rights activist, Mr. Ramesh Jaipal, participated in this. And on October 1st, as part of China Day, Professor Senni delivered a lecture on China's repression of religious freedom and persecution of Falun Gong. We are still seeking applications for January 2023 session for the fellowship training program, and we are inviting volunteer faculty to join us. A few housekeeping rules for the audience. Kindly mute yourself to avoid noise interference. Change your cell phone to vibration mode. When the fellow or the faculty is speaking, please don't interrupt them. Only audience members who identify themselves are allowed to ask questions. Questions have to be very precise and specific and have to be sent through chat function. Lastly, we record all our seminars and programs. So a recording of this program would be available within 24 hours on our website as well as part of our fellowship training programs homepage. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Anushree Ghisad, who has made this sort of preparation for this seminar on her own. I have my serious doubts whether the faculty preceptor will join or not. So Anushree, that floor is yours.
Dhanyavad Adityanji. Namaskar everyone. Please let me share my screen first. My presentation doesn't show up.
I thought you had just now shared with me.
Yes. Right, Adityanji, I'm employing the same procedure. Let me try this time. Now I can.
Okay. We can see it. You might want to maximize it. So I just spoke with Dr. Yashodhan. I think he'll be joining us in about 25 minutes or so.
Okay. Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes.
Yes. The slide is small, so either you make it big or you can play it. No, just you see the notes section. Just drag that in. Yes, perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Is it helping now? The full screen view?
Yes. This is good. Thank you.
Okay. So, Namaskar one and all. In the aforesaid topic today, this is my presentation layout for it. I hope for us to discuss and understand some of the critical factors pertaining to right to life for school students in United States of America, wherein I wish to discuss a bit about sanctity of right to life for children in general, then this phenomenon of mass shooting in US, and we will go through some facts. Then we will also discuss some contributing factors leading to this phenomena. We will try to dissect policy paralysis to regulate access to guns. We will also go through some proposed solutions. We will try to see consequences for students who survived this mass shooting. We will also try to see who are high-risk students. We will try to analyze some glaring anomalies which are there right on our face. We will discuss need to strike a golden mean, followed by the concluding remarks. So the right to life is a universally recognized right for all human beings. It is a fundamental right which governs all other existing rights. In its absence, all other fundamental rights have no reason to exist at all. So for children, the right to life is the chance to be able to live and have the possibility to grow, to develop and become adults and contribute in a meaningful way in the society. So this right comprises two essential aspects. First aspect is the right to have one's life protected from the inception of that human being. And second part is right to be able to survive and develop appropriately. Now, whatever that I have said, all this discussion appears to be perfectly logical and in tune with common sense, right? On paper, it appears perfect. So let us shift our discussion to some facts. Facts that showcase what is transpiring on the ground, and these facts are in stark contrast with this line of thought. So in year 2020 alone, over 45,000 Americans died from gun violence. Gun violence or gun terror is the reality of present day American society. It has permeated in all spheres of American life. So starting from churches to parks, grocery stores, movie theaters, street corners, concerts, nightclubs, and most importantly and dangerously, to schools also. So check this. First half of year 2022 saw more than 250 mass shooting instances in USA. In these mass shooting instances, over 2,500 children are already shot dead. Every day, 100 people die in America due to gun violence. And of these 100 people, 12 are children, school-going children. An article which was published in the Washington Post in May 2018, it revealed that more people in USA, which includes US students and teachers, they were killed in 2018 in schools alone than the ones who were killed in military services for the US in the same year. So show me one country in the world that has suffered this level of bloodbath due to gun violence over and over again. With its rising frequency in school, it has targeted the most vulnerable lot of its population, which is the school children. An important question is it mere gun violence, or are we pointing at something which is far more dangerous? That is why many researchers chose to call this gun violence as gun epidemic. And this epidemic has caused bloodbath for decades in USA. It has direct bearing on American children's right to life, the most basic of all rights. It has mercilessly trampled upon their right to education by creating an environment of fear, uncertainty, violence, something that is not at all conducive for holistic development of a child. It has made mockery of protection of children, a fundamental facet of Convention of Right for Children. Now, this is certainly not normal. And this is detrimental for children in every which way. So let us look at what that implies. The US is a clear outlier when we look at school shootings each year. This is true in absolute numbers, and this is true per capita also. It is true for mass shootings overall when we look at shootings of 4 or more people in one instance. So clearly the problem of mass shooting in the US is unlike any other country in the world. And young children studying at schools are the vulnerable victims of such crimes. Therefore, school shootings are uniquely American crisis. Mass shootings have become a regular phenomena. To go through some examples, in 1999, Columbine High School massacre in Colorado killed 13 students. In 2007, Virginia Tech shooting killed 33 students. In 2012, Sandy Hook Elementary School shootings in Connecticut killed 27 people. In 2018, Stoneman Douglas High School shooting in Parkland, Florida, it killed 17 students. And most recent of all, in 2022, Robb Elementary School shooting in Texas, it killed 22 students again. Now, this is worth noting, 70% of the perpetrators of school shootings were under age of 18. Their median age was 16 years. 16. Now, this compels us to ask, what are the factors that contribute to such kind of violence? So, by and large, two prominent factors are...
Excuse me, Anushree, I think maybe you're moving your slides, but we're not seeing it on the screen.
I'm moving
We're just
it.
seeing the title slide. We're only seeing
Which
the title
slide
slide.
you are on now? Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
now we're seeing it. Okay.
Okay, so let me keep it this way. So this was my presentation layout. This was the first slide. This was second, where we discussed facts. This is the third, where we discussed some examples. We also went through this chart. And now we are here at contributing factors. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
We can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, good. So by and large, there are two prominent factors. The first one is ease of access to guns. And the second factor is rising cases of deteriorating mental health. Now, let us focus on the second factor for a while. So, rising cases of mental health. For that purpose, I have shared a map. This map showcases worldwide share of population with mental health disorder for year 2019. So, deeper the shade of red, graver is the situation in that country. Now, it is notable that the mental health crisis in US is comparable with some of the European countries. One can also see that countries like Australia and Iran, where propensity of mental health disorder is much higher, yet the instances of mass shooting are much rare compared to that of US. So clearly mental health deterioration cannot be the prime factor in this analysis. So that leaves us with the first option, which is easy access to guns. So let us dissect this factor further. Again, let us start with facts in hand that we have. Can you see the next slide?
Yes, we can.
So US has more guns per person than any other country. In this chart, you can see that the US has more guns, more than twice of the guns per capita when compared to the next closest country in that order, which is Yemen. So there are 39 crore 30 lakh guns in USA. This is sufficient to arm every single person in the country because population of USA is 33.19 crore. So if we do this simple math, then the gun is to human being ratio in America is 1.2. That clearly means for every 5 people in USA, there are 6 guns available. Now, this is appalling and this is dangerous also. It clearly deviates from the world average by any standard. In many parts of the US, those guns are easily available even for someone who is as young as 18 years old. Researchers have pointed out that proliferation of guns is the moot factor behind the rising gun epidemic in USA. Now, the pattern is very evident. Easy access to guns means larger gun violence. And with technological advancement, this gun control is going to be even more difficult. We have already seen that 70% of the perpetrators of school shootings were under the age of 18. Their median age was 16. Now, out of those 70%, 85% obtain guns from their own homes or from their friends or relatives. So even after countless mass shootings, US shows no readiness to confront the gun epidemic which has caused this kind of bloodbath in the country. So at the heart of this malice lies policy paralysis. And that policy paralysis stems from two major factors. So the first factor is the Second Amendment of the US Constitution. It protects gun rights, meaning it gives rights to the individuals to bear guns. Now it is considered sacrosanct by many. Armed citizens are considered to be the best guarantor of personal safety and security. And this is an article of faith, a non-negotiable right for many US citizens. But these are the very guns that are terrorizing American children today. Second factor is military-industrial complex in America. It basically refers to a network of individuals and institutions which are involved in production of weapons and military technology also. So in this case, National Rifle Association, NRA, is one such example. It is practically a monolith. By 20th century, it became a very powerful lobby. Today, NRA spends nearly $3 million per year to influence gun policy of America. Now, members of NRA include powerful politicians, industrialists, and even celebrities. It regularly lobbies against all forms of gun control because it wants to maximize the profit. So, NRA stymies credible research in gun violence. They protect gun radicals who do not want any training requirement for gun weapons. According to one research center of Washington, in 2016, 53% members of House of Representatives received direct campaign contribution from these gun lobbies. Now one can imagine their clout when President Biden remarked this after the Texas school shooting. As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to gun lobby? This military-industrial complex has frustrated even the most modest of gun reforms. So what are these reforms that we are talking about and what are some of the proposed solutions? One of the solutions that has come in the picture is allowing teachers to carry guns. Many states are serious about this option and their rationale is armed teachers can reduce frequency of gun violence in school. But again, this solution requires more guns. Many analysts have called it as misplaced response because more guns will lead to more violence. Now, another solution is appointing police officers in schools. This has already taken in place. These police officers are called school resource officers. Now, even with their best of the intention, these SROs are not trained to behave with children. So, for example, in 2017-18, over 54,000 students were arrested. Some were arrested because they were charged with assaults, while others were charged for throwing paper planes in the school. 5-year-old child with ADHD was arrested for throwing fit. So point is, presence of SROs is not free of any downside. It has led to higher number of arrests of school students. It has also increased number of suspensions of these students. So that automatically casts an effect on children's right to education in free and fair environment. And right to education has direct bearing on right to life. There are some of the bills which are noted here, like red flag law, which provides due process to take away someone's gun based on the suspicion that the person can use that gun to hurt himself or to the community. Then there is HR8 bill, which warrants background check for firearm sale. Then there is Enhanced Background Checks Acts, which revises background check requirements for the firearm transfer. These bills have been introduced, but to my knowledge, they haven't been passed yet. Now, some people argue that many school shootings in America are non-fatal in nature. Agreed. Non-fatal shootings exceed in number compared to the fatal ones. There is zero or no casualty in non-fatal shootings. But that doesn't mean that they do not have an impact. A study suggested that students who have been exposed to shootings at school are more likely to be chronically absent and to be held back a grade in 2 years after that event. They were also significantly less likely to graduate high school, go to graduate, or end up becoming a graduate from any college. That impacts extend into their early adult life. In their mid-20s, they were less likely to be employed and had lower earnings when compared to the peers who had not been exposed to that kind of shooting at school. So the findings also suggest that the aggregate cost of school gun violence in terms of lost lifetime earnings is nearly $5.8 billion. Plus, the negative impact of mental and holistic well-being cannot be quantified. So, when we take into consideration lives of children who have lost their lives in gun shootings because their right to life ceased to exist, we must not forget about hundreds of other students who survived school shooting because their right to life is now permanently compromised. These students will be forced to live with the consequences of what happened for decades to come. Take a look at this graph. It shows that the local usage of antidepressants in an area where mass shooting takes place, specifically in a school, it has climbed after these kind of shootings. Also, another important question is, who is at higher risk when such kind of mass shooting happens in school? The empirical evidence that we have, it suggests that there are certain groups which are more prone to this kind of shooting. It poses higher risk to students with color. So this includes Black Americans, American Indians, Hispanic children, and also students with disabilities. So for instance, 38% of the students who experienced school shootings were Black American. Although Black American comprise only 16% of the total school population in America. So that brings us to the another part of our presentation, which is there are some glaring anomalies which we cannot help but notice. So there is an international convention called Convention on the Rights of Child, CRC. It is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in the world. Now, it has been ratified by 195 countries. This treaty specifically asks countries to protect children's right to life, to protect them from violence, and to advance their rights to education, healthcare, and decent standard of living, something which is very basic. Only a few handful countries have not ratified it. This includes Somalia, South Sudan, and United States of America. There are US laws and practices which violate the convention in important ways. If time permit, or in the question answer session, I can actually give some examples as to how this convention is violated. Since USA has not ratified this convention, you cannot hold this country accountable, and that is a glaring anomaly. Now, coming to the political dimension of this anomaly, which is the second factor, many people argue that it is basically a Democrat versus Republican issue. Now, the question is, when serialized horrendous tragedies continues to terrorize kids, what political dimension can possibly justify that? How can the right of mere survival of a child can be politicized? As for the third aspect, which is the geopolitical dimension, Now, it is indeed ironical that a country that has decimated functioning democracies in, or rather functioning governments in other countries, citing human rights violation, or a country whose Senate has passed resolution to honor Malala Yousafzai as an icon of girl child's education, that country has miserably failed and continues to fail its own children, its own school students. And that brings us to the concluding part of this presentation. Where is the golden mean? So almost all Eastern philosophies, they teach us Madhyampada Marga, which is the golden mean path. So it is important to strike that balance, because if the society is afflicted with imbalances, then that imbalance is bound to affect a section of society. And same is happening in the USA. Obsession with the right to bear guns, it's costing the country its own children, its own posterity. Their lives are being snatched away, and those who survive are also traumatized for life. So it literally boils down to enforcing the right, that is, right to carry gun, versus protecting lives of innocent children. And it defies all logics and common sense that one is compelled to ask this question: which one is more important? Enforcing right to bear guns or ensuring right to life of children? Now, that is where relative balance of proportion comes into play. Look at the irreversible damage that this gun epidemic is causing at human level. 12 children, we have already seen 12 children die every day from gun violence in America. It means almost 24 parents are robbed of a child per day. Countless kids are robbed of their siblings, and thousands of kids have lost their friends and classmates, and teachers also. They are scarred for life. The emotional and psychological damage it causes in all other facets of lives of these surviving children, that is beyond our measure. Hence, striking the golden mean is need of an hour. Now, for my concluding remarks, I urge you to take a good look at this child in this photo. She is Mia Cirillo. She is barely 11 years old. She is a survivor of Robb Elementary School massacre in Texas. Now we know this mass shooting killed 19 of her classmates. The gunman shot 2 of her teachers right in front of her eyes. But Mia managed to survive. How? When the gunman thought that he was done with shooting in her classroom, he went to adjoining room. Now fearing that he might return to kill her and her remaining surviving classmates, Mia dipped her hands in the blood of a classmate who was already dead and lay next to her, and she literally smeared that blood all over her body to play dead. Mia's mother said her daughter is traumatized and she can't even sleep. She has turned ultra sensitive to any kind of sound or noise around her. Her parents are actually raising funds to specifically pay for her therapy. Now, this is a story of a child who has survived gun shooting in her school. In all possibility, she might resume her education, but will that be the same experience? There are thousands of such Mias in America who have survived gun shooting but suffer from post-trauma stress disorder. In absence of their fundamental right to life, all other rights practically cease to exist automatically. Now a society has to strike a balance of proportion. For that, it has to reflect and introspect its priorities, the obsession that it has with a certain set of rights, and the kind of disregard it is creating on other sets of rights. And that is where it has to ask this question: is the rights regime that we human beings have created for ourselves, is it meant to simplify our lives, or is it served to paralyze it? And in the answer to that question lies that society's commitment to protect its posterity, irrespective of its personal biases, be it personal or political. Because if a society chooses not to protect its posterity, not to secure its right to life, then it is doomed to suffer repeatedly. Hence, it is high time for American society to reflect and act before it's too late. With this, I would like to end my presentation. These are some of the references that I have used along my presentation. Dhanyavad.
So, thank you very much indeed, Anushree. you did this presentation all by yourself without the help of your faculty preceptor who has been missing in action. But you, in short period of 25 minutes, you know, carried the sum and substance of this problem we are, discussing today. So my heartfelt thanks to you that you did an outstanding job, putting everything on the table. No, really, it is commendable in short period of time. It's a very, very emotional and very, very touchy subject. So I must thank you. As I said, we usually have a 10-minute commentary by Professor Nanda. He is also not able to join today. And since the faculty preceptor is missing in action, we will open the general discussion. And it's a very small group, so anyone who wants to make comments, please raise your hand so I can give you the floor. Who wants to? Okay, Carl, please go ahead.
Thank you, Anushree, for that presentation. I just have a couple of questions. One is that we see that in terms of the uh, rates of gun ownership, in terms of the number of guns per hundred, per 100 people and so forth, that rate has actually come down over the decades in the US. Going back to say even the 80s versus this decade, we see the rate of gun ownership has fallen in the United States. However, the rate of gun violence has risen extremely sharply in that period of time. So it's kind of like an inverse relationship over there. Also, if we look at the geographical distribution of the US, some of the states with the highest gun ownership are like some of the box states up north, like the Dakotas and so forth, that also have a very closely knit religious communities in those areas, faith-based communities. And we see that the levels of gun violence over there are amongst the least across the United States. So again, there's an inverse relationship over there. I'm trying to understand what are really some of the other hidden factors that people are not talking about that might be responsible for this epidemic. I do agree that you know the levels of gun ownership and the kind of checks in terms of who's allowed to have a gun and not, they certainly need to be closely inspected. But I'm kind of wondering what some of the other factors are that perhaps people are not talking about.
Anushree, do you want to answer the question, or we shall take this question a little later?
Kanji, I do not have a very concrete answer which will be backed by facts to answer your question.
Thank you, Anushree. It's okay if you do not have the answer. I will deal with this question towards later part of the seminar. I want to give floor to Hardam Tripathi. Hardam, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. By the way, Miss Anushree, you did a wonderful job on this presentation. I want to commend you as well. Being a legal scholar of sorts, I really enjoy these kind of presentations because it really goes into the substance of the law and policy, and also how populaces, especially in the United States, deal with gun rights and gun violence, the Second Amendment. You touched on a lot of those points, so I commend you for basically putting all that together in such a short amount of time. I did want to just make a point with HR 8 that you were talking about. You had stated that you did not know exactly where it was at, but it had passed the House of Representatives. There was a Democrat, there was a representative from California who had proposed this bill. It was a bipartisan type of bill. So it did go through the House of Representatives, but unfortunately it did stall in the U.S. Senate. And currently it's on roll call at the moment. So I just wanted to put that out there for just information's sake. But my question was, I'm always big on policy when I look at all these different insights, and when you look at different sides of the aisle when it comes to gun violence in our schools or the right to life. My question for you is, when you were doing a little bit of the research, what kind of policy proposals did you see that were being implemented that you think would work in terms of curbing gun violence, Or what do you think that the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate could do to ultimately work together to come to a bipartisan solution with respect to gun violence? Just want to see what kind of policy measures you would think from your research that would benefit, Americans, or, in basically reducing gun violence in a matter of its totality.
Ardham, if I may interject, your question is very pertinent. And I think it should be answered, and we should make it part of discussion, just like Mr. Clemens's question. I think it'll be a little unfair for Anushree, who is sitting in India and making this presentation, to talk about the domestic policy of United States, which is very complex. I think we will have this discussion during the seminar, but I really don't want to put Anushree on the spot. Anushree, do you want to attempt to answer? But it's a very, loaded question.
Yes, I did not mean to come off as it being a loaded question. Just wanted to say, from an outside perspective, from an international perspective, how can Americans do better in curbing gun violence from a policy standpoint?
Okay. Dhanyavad Hadamanji. So I do not have any personal standpoint vis-a-vis this question, but there is something interesting that I came across during some of my readings. So I hope this might answer this question to some extent. There is this person called Tony Montalto. He's president of Stand with Parkland. So basically, his 14-year-old daughter was one of the victims during Parkland mass shooting. So in 2018, he came up with this organization per se, where such parents and relatives of students who had been through this kind of horrendous experience, they came together and they understood that there is a lot of political division in the US society vis-a-vis such kind of reform. So they said that we don't want to make it political, but at least what we can attempt is that we can find a middle ground and we can try to work on something which, while protecting the sanctity of Second Amendment, yet it strives to protect our children. So that is where he had said that the red flag laws, they can be some that can serve as a starting point for the Senate, because that would be the most pragmatic step for the Senate to take into place. Also, we talk about HR 8 thing also. So the whole point being that the Congress is trying to look at the obstacles in this entire process, but it would be much of a nicer thing for the society to find more of a solution, and that is where he was trying to find out more of these golden mean steps, and that is what his organization was suggesting. There were many more nitty-gritties which some of them I have noted and I am not finding where I have noted them, others I have simply not noted.
Thank you, Anushree. You did a wonderful job, but I think
Thank you.
It's a little unfair to ask Anushree that question. We have a couple of guests. One is Mr. Ran Jagannathan. Ran, do you have any comments or questions?
No, sorry. No, I don't have any questions. I'm just listening. Thank you.
Any comments, any suggestions, any policy advice?
Well, no, nothing off the bat. I might have something later on, but nothing right now.
We have another guest by name Prabhu Narunvahi. Do you want to ask any question or make any comments, Prabhu? So he has sent a comment through the chat function, and I'm going to read this. My thinking is high level of corruption is responsible for killing of innocents. Think of how much money NRA pumps. And that's a very valid comment on the current state of affairs. Obviously, mega amount of money does play a role into it. And there's a comment by Mr. Tripathi, profits over lives, unfortunately. That also is very, very valid comment. We have our other fellow, Ripudaman Pachori, who has actually presented seminars on children's rights and stuff like that. Ripudaman, do you have any comments or observations? Looks like we lost Ripudaman. So maybe I will join with the discussion, starting with very relevant comments from Carl. Carl, you have another observation. Please go ahead.
Just one more quick comment is that, and again, this is not something that we discuss very much publicly, although there are surveys published even by Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, saying that the race to buy more guns really spiked and has continued to climb since Barack Obama became president for the first time, his first term. And I remember I was living in Ohio at the time, and just within Ohio, the applications for legal gun um, ownership and carry were upwards of 800,000 in one state alone. So I think there's a race angle also over there when Barack Obama was elected, and that signaled a shift in American politics, and that's had a direct impact on gun ownership and the formation of what were called Christian militias. I've had a chance to interact with some of them, and they've been pretty explicit about it.
So, Carl, coming to your original question, that although the rate of gun ownership is going down, the rate of gun violence is increasing in a bubble, and that bubble is United States. Let me make a few observations before I answer that. So we have doctrine of American exceptionalism. Doctrine of American exceptionalism says that we are a unique country. We are not beholden to anyone. We are not beholden to any international law, any international convention, any international covenant. And we are the high moral power, and we can dictate and we can lecture to other countries what they should be doing. Nobody has right to lecture to us what we ought to be doing. That is, in nutshell, doctrine of American exceptionalism in its practice. And this gets proven in case after case, situation after situation, that there's a failure to do self-introspection by American society, by American political establishment, and American intelligentsia. At all levels, there is this failure to introspect. If you fail to introspect, you cannot change behaviors, you cannot change policies. If there is no insight, there is no desire to change. If everything is hunky-dory, if everything is perfect, the perfect Constitution, the perfect Second Amendment from 1776, what's the need to change? So there is this doctrine of American exceptionalism, which, quoting a very, very famous person, has become opium of the American masses. And it is the opium of American masses, the doctrine of American exceptionalism, that we are the superior society, we are highly moralistic, we take care of the world, the whole world is, entire world is our burden, we have the moral responsibility to correct everyone. So institutions like USCIRF created that, moralize, sermonize everyone, every other country, but they cannot look inwards and do self-introspection. Carl, you may have heard a word called anomie. Tell us what is anomie for sake of other people.
The way I understand the word, it is where people feel isolated and alienated in a community, a sense of loneliness, and a general sense of ennui about their existence. That's my understanding.
It's a sociological concept going back to not 19th century, but even 18th century. And a state of anomie happens when the bonds between individuals are frayed. There's no togetherness, there's no sense of community. And knowing that US society is highly individualistic society, the individual rights trump over societal norms or societal rights. That is also a given. But what you are seeing is that whatever little societal structures were, they have frayed, they have ruptured. So when we are analyzing everything, we need to take into consideration in a multivariate analysis the variable of an anomie in the society. There is no linear relationship between decline in gun ownership and increase in gun violence. In a complex, model, you will have other factors impinging on these two factors, impacting on those, and leading to the results that there are. So it's not unidimensional relationship between gun ownership, that if gun ownership goes down, the gun violence should go down. There are other factors that are impinging, and one of them is anomie. Second is the drug epidemic in United States. The third variable is the breakdown of family structure in United States. There is much more violence. There's much more mental health issues in single family households. And if anyone does a sophisticated studies and takes all these factors into consideration, you will find that, some amount of variance will be attributed to pretty much all of these things. As a society, US society has failed. It's a failed society. Ardham, coming to your point, there's policy paralysis, you know that. And that policy paralysis is the result of failure of the civic institutions of this country. To the extent that the country is being bracketed along with Somalia and South Sudan, Anushree, that's a very rich reputation for United States to earn, to be in the august company of countries like Somalia and South Sudan. That speaks for itself. So there are a lot of variables that are impinging on relationship between gun ownership, the rate of gun ownership, and increase in gun violence. Carl, your second observation that the highest gun ownership is in the northern states, which are still somewhat intact, either community-wise or religion-wise or ethnicity-wise. Their societies are less inflicted with anomie at state level. Okay, the communities are relatively well preserved, and there are other challenging adversities, environmental and other, that makes people, believe in the sense of community. So I think the variable that is helping the northern states is less of anomie, more preservation of family structure, which is probably resulting in less of gun violence. So these are factors to ponder as to what is the relationship between gun ownership and increase in gun violence. Of course, these are some of the factors. There are other variables. And the other variables are mental health issues. But to solely blame mental health issues as a cause of gun violence again is political sophistry done by a certain section of the US society. You have to blame someone, so blame on mental health without looking at a sophisticated sociological model of this epidemic of gun violence. I think it's very difficult to answer Hardam's question as to what are the policy recommendations. Because policy recommendations may be very obvious, but because the society is totally ruptured, there is no will to do any rational solution. So after each epidemic or after each incidence of gun violence, you have the same ritual. The ritual is that don't politicize it. This is not time to talk about politics. We pray for the souls of departed and pray for strength for the families of the victims. And after a few days, it's business as usual. There is dishonesty at all levels of the society. And the solutions that have been suggested, having police officers in the school. What happened in the last episode of gun violence in the school? The police officers themselves were scared actually to go inside and refused to go for an hour while children were being slaughtered. And not only they did that, they also prevented the parents from going inside and stopping the gun violence. I mean, that is height of whatever you can say. And this is not the first time when the school police officers have failed to intervene. In some other instances, the police officers themselves have hidden or failed to respond or made excuses that they did not have their walkie-talkie or whatever, wireless communication or something like that. And in one case, the police officer actually took premature retirement and retired with full salary. So I think we are seeing absurdity of highest order in US society, and a society that moralizes and sermonizes to the rest of the world on human rights cannot protect the human rights of its own children. And Anushree, you threw very challenging questions and made observations that these children are traumatized for the rest of their life. Being a psychiatrist, I can tell you that what they suffer is post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a chronic condition. And you did show that study showing relationship between antidepressant prescriptions, shooting up after each incidence of gun violence, because it's not that the people who got killed in fatal shootings, they are gone. They have families and they have extended families. So each kid that is lost has at least 2 parents and 4 grandparents, if not sibs. And you have to think the predicament of those parents also. So we are dealing with very, very complex issues. And for a person like Anushree sitting from India, it will be very difficult to give policy prescriptions. I think it behooves the United States society to find the solutions for itself rather than look to other nations to give it solutions. Because This is a self-created problem. Anushree wants to come in. Go ahead and give your comments, Anushree.
Adityanji, can I make an attempt to add one dimension to the question that Kalji had asked?
Sure, go ahead.
This is again based on my understanding, but what I feel is that one dimension could be absence of what we call a runa-based society. So, coming like looking the situation from where I come, I see the society around me by and large is highly runa oriented, as in it is debt oriented. So, a debt to one's forefathers, debt to one's society, debt for parents, debt for teachers, that becomes the cardinal point of life. And when that is the governing point of life, the value system which is cherished by individual and society is highly duty centric. This is my general observation. And when the society is duty centric, there is lesser propensity for any ludicrous obsession for an individual right. And even if you have such kind of people, they are not a rule, they are an exception. So
And
that in a way translates into the propensity of like that. So I mean that society is less rights oriented as against more duty centric, and that is a dimension which is lacking in the entire discussion that we have had. Not having that dimension could actually be a contributing factor in my assessment, sitting from the
I
country
think
like India.
it's a valid observation that, too much focus on rights and less focus on duties and responsibilities is definitely, and we have discussed this issue in previous seminars, that there has to be a balance between those two aspects, and it goes pretty much for everything. And that is definitely one of the variables that should be taken into consideration. But when we talk about generally anomie, that is what we are talking about, the relationship of individual to the society. So that's a broader variable, but much more specific variable is balance between duties versus individual rights. Before going this discussion further, I think Ripudaman has joined back. Ripudaman, do you have any questions, comments, or observations or policy prescriptions?
No, Adityanji, no, not at this point of time, no.
So we come back to Hardam Tripathi's question, what are the policy prescriptions? And Hardam is the best person. He is Director of Policy and Legal Affairs for ICHRRF. Hardam, if I were to ask you as to give paper on policy prescriptions on this particular topic, what would be your response?
It's basically what everyone's been saying. Literally, if you look at it, it's not top down; it's bottom up. I think we as a society, from a molecular level, need to change the way we work on a day to day. We can have all these facts and statistics, but at the end of the day, going back to what you were saying, Dr. Adindinji, is that it comes down to the molecular level. How do we treat each other in our communities? How do we treat each other on a community level or a family level? What value systems do we have in place? And then furthermore, using those value systems, being those people who then take those value systems from a molecular level and then bring them to a macro level in terms of getting involved in the process, getting involved with your congressional offices, speaking to them about pushing change and driving change by also taking into account statistics and facts at that point. But ultimately, it's not a very easy answer. You actually hit it on the head. It has to start from the bottom up. It has to change from the lobby to have less power. We as a society have to hold a lobby, with a level of ethical standards, which are lacking, I think, on a macro level. There needs to be more laws around that, especially when it comes down to gun rights and gun violence. This is something that can be fixed, not on a state to state or even a federal level, but more on an amendment level, a constitutional level. But there have to be people who are willing to stand up and work together on both sides of the aisle, as what Anushree stated over and over. This is a bipartisan issue, but it's a family issue. It's an ethical issue. It's a people issue. It's not a political issue. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we as a society have to take a deeper introspection, I think, have a hard look at who we stand for as a society, morally, ethically, and even legally, and then use those three values to then ultimately shape policy at a congressional level. So I think that's what we have to do. I think as a society moving forward, that's just a blanket wrap up, but a white paper could discuss many different facets of that on a state by state or on a school by school shooting or a concert shooting or whatever you're talking about. But the principles stay the same. How do we as a society reach a tipping point where we need to do better as a society and then create policy solutions working together? And we realize that the lives of human beings and the lives of children and having the lives of pro-life and believing in the value of life and the sanctity of life is worth more than the money that's driving it on the back end, the dark money.
Thank you,
Profits
Hardam.
over people. That's unfortunately what's going on, and
Thank you, Hardam.
that's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Actually, Anushree, your faculty preceptor finally joined. Dr. Yashodhan, do you have any comments on this particular topic?
Yeah, so thanks, and I apologize for joining late. I was in another meeting which I could not avoid. So I hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, you are audible to all of us.
Yeah, so I mean, thanks. So, and good to see Anushree. I think we never interacted, so it's very fitting that when she was speaking, I was not around. So you must say that although I am a preceptor, it's her own research which she has conducted. So it's pretty much a self-guided thing from her. So I think, but I would be happy to interact a little more with her in the future on this particular topic. And I'm pretty sure you might have discussed about the laws and then the gun violence related to some of the issues. And I think Hardam was, I could hear some of his remarks and interventions which he made in last few minutes. And he was trying to touch upon the societal and the family value issue in all of this. And I think that also is something which someone needs to explore. I mean, when you think about it from any, what I would say is, if I would like to present my thesis about this particular gun violence issue, what I would say rather is any kind of an extreme thought process of any sort is going to create some societal perturbations, such as extreme emphasis on the market capitalism. It's like, we have to sell as many guns as possible. I mean, and that's quite obvious. For example, but what is not obvious is probably the extreme emphasis on the left leaning thought processes. Uh, I would like to refer all of you, I think, I don't know whether it was discussed here, to one of the research conducted by Professor Warren Farrell, I think from Princeton. And I think what he mentioned, he has written a wonderful book called A Boy Crisis. And I would like to refer everyone to that particular book. And that particular book, the thesis of that particular book is how extreme uh, emphasis on some of the radical feminazi policies by some of the our feminist colleagues is leading to fatherless households in the northern America and the Western Europe. And what happens is, that's why, and I think he has gone into much more detail about like what sort of an impact that can have on a child's psychology. And if you see that the gun violence, I think the majority of them are done by teenager boys, right? And I think he has presented some of the statistics around that. Um, and I think Adityanji is here and he'll be able to speak much more eloquently about the child psychology issue, which is here. But the point is that the non-existence of a father figure in the household during the growing up ages, and that's what he has alluded to. And then non-existence of right sort of a role model for children, and then invasion of the violent computer games, and trying to establish your own self in front of the peers, which is quite prominent amongst the teenagers. And that is also sometimes leading to some acts such as these. That's what the thesis he has presented. I think he went on, he has also presented some of the solutions. And I think, as far as I know, he was trying to push some of those solutions during the President Trump's administration, and even now during the President Biden's administration. But what is happening is, I think before we prescribe any policy solutions about this particular issue, we need to identify that there is a boy crisis, right? So there is a boy crisis happening in the West. And then there is all the things probably you would have already discussed, is the easy access to the guns, and there is no scrutiny who is buying it. There is no database on where the guns are sold. There are licensing issues, and I'm pretty sure those issues are very important to structure a proper process of sales of arms. But having said that, I think the value issues, the family value issues, which probably it's time that we recognize them. And then that's one of the things. So extreme right or extreme left, I think that's going to cause some sort of societal perturbation. So that's a limited intervention I have. I'm sorry again for joining late, but I would love to continue conversing on this particular topic. Aditya.
Thanks for your comments and observations. We have obliquely discussed this. Anushree did talk about a balance between duties and rights. And we talked about, fraying of the societal structure and a state of anomie that has been increasing in US society in recent years, with single family, becoming a kind of norm. So whenever you see a complex problem, you have a multi-dimensional, solution based on multivariate root cause analysis. And I think those are the factors that need to be taken into consideration amongst the other ones that we discuss. I know Anushree wants to jump in. Anushree, go ahead, please. Anushree, go ahead.
Namaskar, Yashodhanji. I did not want to say anything. I just wanted to ask, can you repeat the name of the book that you cited just now?
Yeah, Professor Warren Farrell, The Boy Crisis. The name of the book is Boy Crisis. I can send it across to you if you share your email address with me. I can send it across, the name of the book. And I think he also prepared a policy proposal, and he tried to push it through during the President Trump's administration. I think probably I could read some of the proposals there, and they were very reasonable and logical proposals. I would like to make one more point very quickly. Is also the what we see is some of the institutions which we believe are creating this particular issues. Like, for example, natural reaction is, oh, gun lobby, we are against them. No, we are not against anybody. It's everybody is a part of the solution. It's just that we are not telling them to shrink their profit margins, but if they kind of ramp up the cost of the arms, I mean, the sales is going to go down, but their profits are not going to shrink. So there are business solutions also to structure this particular problem. So if we treat everyone as a stakeholder, I think we will be much better off. But ideologically, I mean, I'm completely of the opinion that it needs to be structured. The sales of the arms need to be controlled. I mean, nobody will deny that. But from a pragmatic solution perspective, I mean, we can think about some of the out of the box solutions for this particular thing. Sorry, Aditya.
How would you consider analogy to sale of tobacco to kids, or sale of alcohol to kids, or restriction of license to children less than 16 years old? Every society has to have certain rules. Now, if you become totally blind about total blind opposition to any kinds of rules on one particular issue and blame everyone, that does not help. Unrestricted, absolute access to guns without any restriction by any person whatsoever in a constitution that was written in 1776. I think that shows about moral bankruptcy and intellectual bankruptcy. Society has moved, the situation has moved, the technology has moved, the assault weapons that are being created, they have become improved. So why this absolute insistence that is leading to very, very chaotic situation? And Yashodhanji, I will take point with you when you say that nobody is trying to shrink their margins of profit. Why not? Why would we not want to shrink the profit margins for drug dealers?
I agree with you completely ideologically. I mean, just from the pragmatic perspective, if you can, we can suggest them that you should do some business diversification, maybe probably start manufacturing some toys and games using the technological know-how you have rather than having actual guns. Sell maybe games and toys to the children, and so do some business diversification. And if we nudge them in that direction, I mean, what happens is if we you're right, I mean, their profits need to shrink, but the point is the moment we start the conversation with that principle, I think the
Well, I
lobbies
ask
are.
rhetorical questions just to challenge,
I know,
you
I
know,
know, I know,
the
absolutely.
civilized notions that we are not trying to restrict the profit. I'll give you the analogy, if I may say. International community tried to restrict opium cultivation, opium poppy cultivation in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Okay. And they encouraged a policy of crop substitution. So if international community, including United States government, could advocate that for a third country policy of crop substitution to avoid the danger of heroin and opioids and narcotics,
Sure.
why
Policy for
aren't
thee, not for me.
yes? So again, I come back to this, doctrine of American exceptionalism, that ultimately it boils down to the doctrine of American exceptionalism, that we are morally superior to everyone else and nobody can correct us, nobody can guide us. We are the Homo moralis instead of Homo sapiens. Uh, I think that is where the problem lies. And until
Absolutely.
you have that insight, you will not change. You know, any behavior change is founded on realization that something is wrong. If you are blasé about it, that there's nothing wrong, we are the superior most society, we can tell India what to do, we can tell Afghanistan what to do, we can tell Yemen what to do, but nobody can tell us.
That's true. I mean, I agree with you completely. I agree with you completely. And I think, see, for instance, I think there has to be a serious study also they should conduct about what sort of a pedagogy they have for child education. I mean, why it is not happening in Finland? Of course, one of the obvious reason, and that needs to be tackled, is access to arms. And I mean, there is no point beating around the bush on that. But the point is also like why there is no willingness amongst the Scandinavian children or German children to take up the arms at such a young age is because probably their education system is much more accessible, much more innovative, uh, helps children to find their own interests. I mean, there is a crisis as far as the public education system as well, and I think I mean,
Yashodhanji, why go to Germany and Scandinavia? Let's
right,
compare Canada and United States.
yeah,
Are there instances of gun violence in Canada like they happen in United States? You know, uh, Both are North American countries. Both are, Christian countries, if I may use the word, Judeo-Christian countries. Both are democracies. Both are prosperous democracies. Both have majority, population of European extraction. So there are a lot of commonalities. Both use English language. So why this divide? There's only one factor: Second Amendment. So a lack of any constitutional right akin to Second Amendment in Canada, where you can regulate the gun ownership or access to guns, acts as a vaccination or immunization against chaotic, anarchist gun violence in Canadian society. Why it cannot be done in United States? And Mr. Clemens, we come back to your issue that northern states, upper northern states have high gun ownership, but they still do not have that gun violence. So you may be having a gradient from up north going down southwards. Most of these incidents are coming actually more and more from the southern states.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
So let me be the devil's advocate. Let's say there's an international tribunal which is monitoring a country X, and country X has a lot of gun violence, and international community becomes very, very concerned because in country X, children are being killed left, right, and center. And this international tribunal comes with certain observations that we'll put conditionalities on country X, that you shall not be able to print any more currency till you bring down the level of gun ownership in your country. Now, if you put those conditionalities, would you be able to reduce gun violence?
I mean, yeah, theoretically,
Not
yeah.
if country X is America. No.
Yeah.
So that is the answer. This is the doctrine of American exceptionalism, which is the root cause of this problem. We can blame other factors which may be mediating variables, but the actual variation is a variable that is leading to this situation. And policy paralysis and lack of will is the doctrine of American exceptionalism that nobody can tell us. We are the righteous people, we have the best constitution, though it was written 300 years ago and is certainly deficient, but you cannot tell us. We can tell Japan how to write your constitution and have, no armed forces. We can dictate to other countries how to write constitution, how to enforce laws, how to respect human rights, but nobody can tell us.
True. I mean, I just yesterday read a very interesting advertisement by one of the ex McKinsey guy who has a very successful startup in Bangalore in India. He was saying that it was saying, oh, some folks from Meta and Twitter, there are now good reasons to move back to India, and one of the reasons cited was you are not worried when your children go to school in India that there will be a gun violence. And it's a realistic situation. If we talk to young Indian American, who have a young family, they are worried to raise their children in this country. They feel, and it can happen anywhere. I mean, absolutely anywhere where one is not expecting even it to happen. So I mean, yeah, I think it's a serious issue. And policy paralysis, lobbyists, what can we say more?
And Dr. Yashodhan, you make a great point. Just to add to the discussion, as a U.S. immigration attorney here in the U.S., I have a lot of clients who, after coming here, they want to move back to their home country because they then have children and they're very scared about their children going to public schools or any school for that matter, where there may be gun violence that could show up. And they say, well, look, in this such and such country here, we don't have that much gun violence. We feel safer, so we would like to relinquish our green card or whatever rights they have here, and people are moving back. So we're seeing an exodus as well, at least from, people I've seen on a day-to-day practice level, because these policies just aren't being implemented. And unfortunately, it has real world consequences for people through migration even.
Absolutely.
Adam, you raised a very, very interesting point. And it may not be just about gun violence. If you see the number of rich Americans giving US citizenship, buying property in New Zealand.
Yep.
Americans top the list of foreign investors in New Zealand who are buying property. Why they are doing so? There's a cause. So yes, gun violence may be one, but there are other ways in which there are societal problems here. And even millionaires and billionaires are choosing to leave the country because of the problems, because at individual level they can perceive the problems and they would like to have a much quieter, much less stressed lifestyle. So people are moving out of the country. So coming back to the epidemic of gun shootings, I think it's a moral failure of the society we are living in this country, that is actually playing a joke with the lives of children. And I see teenagers and I see youngsters, and I have my own children. And in 60s, all over the Western world, there was a fear of death, and that was generated by the unbridled nuclear weapons threat between Soviet Union and Western Europe. And that led to 1960s generation, the generation that grew up in 1960s towards a lifestyle of hedonism or hedonism, because you wanted to experience each and every experience of life, even if you were 10 years old or 12 years old, because you were not sure when you will die. If you talk to school kids in this country, they are not sure whether they will be alive by the time they are 18, because of this perpetual threat of gun violence. And that's a very, very sad story, a very, very sad state of affairs, that children 10, 12, 13, 14 are not sure if they will survive till age 18. So it's not just the survivors and the family members who have trauma. There is a mass level anticipatory anxiety in the young kids, because they know what is going on in the society, and it's leading to a high level of stress. And as a human rights organization, it's our responsibility to point out publicly if there are societal failures, without feeling that we are offending the powers that be, the rulers, the highly superior moralistic system of jurisprudence and governance, the most evolved system of jurisprudence and governance, because that is what is at fault. So I think we have to show the place to the policy planners, the leaders, the stakeholders as to level of inertia in solving this problem, because it's almost 3 decades this gun violence epidemic in school shootings has gone on now. Any last minute comments from anyone? We have 5 minutes left. If there are no other comments, we will close this session, but it was very, very good discussion. I won't say interesting because it's not interesting. It is very, very depressing when we are talking about children's issues. But I think as an organization and as individuals, we also have a moral responsibility to spread the message of awareness as to where this society is failing and what corrective actions various institutions, stakeholders, leaders, policy planners can take. And yes, there will be some opposition. People who have entrenched ways of thinking will always oppose. But if you believe in the moral cause of survival of children, I think we have to open our voices wherever we may be without being afraid of antagonizing the powers that be. We have to take a righteous, morally righteous stand about survival of children, mental health of children, and trauma to the children caused by this epidemic. And it's an epidemic, everyone sees it, except for people who have selective blindness. So without further ado, let's close this session. My thanks to Anushree Ghisad, who made this seminar presentation all by herself without help from her faculty preceptor. So she did a wonderful job. I'm really impressed. And to our audience, the video recording of this particular seminar will be available as a resource material on our website. And I think in 2 weeks' time, we shall meet again for another Nanda Fellowship Training Seminar. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
धन्यवाद.